So, the beginning.
Episode 1.
Episode 1. So we just built this new room. Well, we didn't build the room, but we did outfit the room with this new podcast equipment. This is our first actually go around at testing the equipment. Maybe not the first time testing each piece of equipment, but as a whole, recording. So we'll figure out how this turns out. But this is a K-Squared podcast. This is technically episode number 1, as long as all the equipment works out just right. And today we decided that we would talk about pre-construction and why pre-construction planning changes everything. So this episode is actually called Beyond Free Estimates. So I wanted to do a brief intro since this will be the first podcast that some people will be listening to. So wanted to introduce ourselves.
My name is Brenna Krouse, and I am a CCID, which is California Certified Interior Designer. Fun fact, I have also passed the contractors exam.
Yeah, state license test. So.
State license, even though you and Jordan like to tease me about rebar, I'm a contractor.
What size rebar is about the size of my finger?
Right, we're not going to do that on this show.
That's not. Just very briefly, my name's Rusty Krouse. I'm one of the owners of K-Squared Construction and Design. And we started this business about 19 years ago, almost 20 years ago now. And we were not always structured like we are now. I think we've came a long way from being in the garage at home on Elm Tree.
A lot of trial and error.
A lot of trial and error. And we weren't always as organized as we are now. I think we started off as more stereotypical contractor, kind of we lovingly like to refer to as like a chuck in a truck. My first van that I brought home, I think you were not too thrilled about. But, it's just a different time. And when you're starting, you just do what you got to do to, make things work. And so I think we started off how many contractors start off, where you have a vehicle, you have tools, you have ambition, you want to
like to build.
Yeah, you enjoy what you do. But I think a lot of people go out with good intentions and still do good things, but they don't realize that, the business side of things can be very difficult and is usually something that most entrepreneurs don't necessarily have. They don't have that skill set working into their business. We didn't either, right? I mean, a lot of this was, if I'm just being honest, some of it was dumb luck, right? And some was, not for lack of hard work, right? But I know people that have been in business for just as long as we have, and sometimes longer, that have worked really hard and actually provide a really good product. But at the same time, they're not necessarily they're not providing their client with something that's special, right? It's more of an industry standard, and there's still a lot of problems and holes, I think, in this industry. We really structured our business around trying to fix some of those things. I think that's what we're going to talk about today. But I do think that it's important for people to understand that there's not just one way to move forward in construction. I think that's probably the most important takeaway in these series of podcasts, right? Is that there's a very stereotypical way that people believe that construction should go, and the path that you need to take to get there. And people also wonder why contractors are so difficult to deal with and pin down, and why things don't turn out the way that the contractor said from the beginning. So, it's just, there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot to unpack, and we're not going to unpack it all in one episode. But I do think that we can touch on some of those points and start on maybe what we feel is the biggest one, which is pre-construction.
Well, I want to start by doing a little pop quiz.
Okay.
What are the 2 things everyone hears or thinks about contractors?
The top 2, because I've got more than 2.
I know. Let's go with the top 2.
I would say number 1 would probably be communication, or some lack of communication, like they didn't call me back, or
I think that's 3 on my list. But let's go to the other 2 that clients always complain about. They always think that a contractor is going to be
on time and on budget.
They think they're not going to be on time.
I guess
Yeah.
that was just my bullets for what two things you were thinking about.
We hear that day in and day out. They finished 6 months after they were supposed to, and I spent twice what I thought I was going to spend.
Right. And I think that isn't always. I think I think one of the common kind of misconceptions in kind of, outside of our industry and the people who are the consumers who hear that and hear all of these kind of bad things, they need to know that it's not necessarily the contractor's fault when that happens. I mean, I think indirectly in almost all cases it is, but again, it's more indirect, right? It's a lack of the client knowing what maybe they're signing or what they're getting into. But then the reason that I say indirectly, I think this is the contractor's responsibility, is because the contractor doesn't always lead the client in a way that can help them, right? And so this is why it's a little bit twofold, right? Like as a consumer, you need to understand what you're buying. And as a contractor, I think you're expected to be the leader, in your industry or your respected, trade. And you should really be, as a contractor, guiding your client the right way, right? You should be trying to set your client up for success, which is, I think, where a lot of contractors miss the mark.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of clients get in their own way too, is that they want to be in charge and they want to sort of dictate how things go, what they're going to pay, how things are going to get built. And at the end of the day, they're hiring a professional to deliver a service to them, and the contractor should be treated as such, right?
Yep.
They are the ones that do this day in and day out as their job and their livelihood, and they should know what they're doing. And you shouldn't hire him if you don't trust him to deliver for you.
That's a good point. So what would you say, is there another industry or some other, can you draw a parallel to another industry where either that happens, where the client is actually leading the industry professional? And I know this is kind of a bit of a trick question, right?
Yeah.
But I think the answer is no, right? And I think we tend to, when we come back from, initial consultations where the client maybe was just not a good fit for us, and we told them that, right, in a nice way. We said, hey, I don't necessarily think that your project is probably a good fit for us. Or maybe it was just the client themselves we felt like probably was not a good fit, and it was because we felt like, they felt that they needed to kind of dictate or run the show. And I think that some of that potentially comes from a good place, right? Is, as when people hire contractors, they think they're going to fail, right? They're going to not do something correctly. And so I need to put that wall up, and I need to, guide this from the beginning so it doesn't get messed up.
I need to make sure he's not overcharging me.
Right. Yeah. Well, we get that a little bit too, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, again, pre-construction helps solve some of this. So maybe we can kind of touch on that a little bit, since that's actually what the episode is about. So let's first talk about the traditional path. I like to call this the traditional path. And this is where I'll put it into terms that our listeners can understand really quickly. You need to get 3 bids and free estimates, right? So this episode, remember, is beyond free estimates. So I just kind of want to explain, again, that more of that traditional path and help people understand why, as contractors now, these are starting to become a little bit more of like a red flag when we hear these types of things. So, and again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to educate our client on why, these things are not what most high-end contractors want to hear. I don't get offended, but at the same time, I do need to help educate them, or we need to help educate them on why these things are kind of red flags.
Yeah. I have a good story about
go ahead.
this too.
Yeah.
So do you remember when we bought our last house?
Yeah.
And this was 14 years ago. or so. So maybe to put pricing in perspective, if I say numbers here. So we bought our house and we basically gutted it, for lack of better words. We redid the kitchen, we redid one of the bathrooms, we did all the flooring. We did a lot. We did a lot of it ourselves. But I looked at this as a really good opportunity to see what our clients experience when they're calling contractors. And so I said, I'm going to call a couple of our competitors. And this is before, we had Instagram and Facebook and everybody kind of knows everybody. But, or I think it was even a contractor that we had maybe lost a couple of jobs to. And I said, I'm going to pretend like I want to redo my kitchen and get them over to the house and see what that experience is like. I want to educate myself, right? And I was, pretty nervous. If you remember, I had to make up my backstory and rehearse what I was going to say. But I ended up having 2 other contractors come over and just meet me. You obviously weren't there. And, walked them through my kitchen and this is what I want to do. And I want, and one of them actually was a lot better than the other. He actually took a lot of notes and, said he would get back to me with my free estimate.
Right.
The other one walked in, literally ran his tape measure in 2 dimensions, which for one was a joke. And I kind of felt like he was patronizing me, but ran his tape measure in 2 directions and said, yeah, there's going to be about $80,000. And I was like, oh, wow. At the time, that was like crazy talk, right? We were probably doing kitchens for 50 around then.
Yeah.
Maybe, a really high-end one. And then when I reacted to that, the price went down immediately. He didn't ask me what kind of cabinets I wanted. He didn't ask me any details other than, I want to redo this kitchen. And that kitchen was changing completely. We were taking out the brick fireplace. We were opening up the wall. We were extending the cabinetry. He didn't have any of that before he just threw me a number. And what was he doing? What was he doing, Rusty?
He was throwing, for lack of a better term, we'll say throwing spaghetti at the wall,
right,
and seeing what stick to it. I think we talk about that a lot, is that, when contractors, we'll rewind a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really fun exercise. And, looking back, I actually feel bad that we that we did that, but it was educational for us. And I think it was something that we felt, like what are we doing differently than everybody else? And I think we've always tried to take that approach with our business. And, are we doing things the same as other people? And if it is the same, are they good? Are they bad? Indifferent? But yeah, there were some contractors out there that were getting a lot of work and, repetitive work. And we felt like we were not maybe as steady at certain times. And yeah, we wanted to know, like, what are these guys doing when they show up, right? And
but he wanted to know one thing. He wanted to know what my budget was.
Right. And I think that's actually the point right here, is that, when a contractor says that they will provide you a free estimate, it's almost always premature to walk into a home and see visually what it is that that client wants, and to be able to provide some number magically as if they had a magic calculator, right? Like, I think that that's really unfair to clients. And
a free guess.
It is a free guess. And I think that's where, maybe another podcast we can kind of get into the difference between an estimate versus a real proposal, right? That's written and has, details in it. And an estimate is quite literally just that. It's just what it sounds like, right? An estimate is a guess. And while that guy was standing there in that moment and he was asking you what you thought, like, you were giving him a roundabout idea of what the project scope was going to be. All he was really looking for was for you to disclose your budget, right? And maybe if you didn't, or he wasn't going to ask you point blank to disclose your budget, because that's always like the elephant in the room, right? If he can't get you to disclose that, then likely what that contractor is going to do is just try to feel you out, right? He's going to throw that spaghetti at the wall and see what your reaction is. Because if your reaction is, oh, 80,000, that seems really high, then he's going to do one of two things. He's either going to say, okay, well, this is not the right job for me. You don't have enough money.
Yeah.
I think and again, it's very speculative at that point, right? I mean, he's not done any true assessment of the project. He knows nothing about the existing systems. He knows nothing about any structural issues. I mean, we were removing a wall in that situation.
And a fireplace, a chimney.
And a fireplace and a chimney. And it's like, we didn't know at that time we did know, but, he didn't know at that time what the structure was like, right? So he couldn't possibly have made all of those, connections to really be able to put that all together for you and put a number on that. Now, that being said, again, there's no magic calculator. There's no like one silver bullet that helps a contractor provide a price. That being said, most contractors have a general idea of where the range is probably going to be, right? And I think that's important for people to know is that you can get that, though, over the phone. A contractor literally does not need to go in most scenarios, right? Not in every scenario.
Kitchens start usually around blank.
Yeah, right. And I think that, obviously 15 years ago that was I think, 15 years ago it was a lot different, right? Where, the prices were different. This is pre-COVID. There were just a lot of the market was just different, right? And I mean, just naturally with kind of cost of housing and inflation and labor, there's all of these factors that have now, it being 2025 now, at least at the time of recording, the costs have went up. And we've got another contractor that we know that's here locally too that always says that the best time to remodel is right now, and it's because the costs never go down, right? Yeah. And I always thought, I know he's going to hear this too, and I always thought in some way that felt always a little bit slimy, right? It felt a little bit like a sales kind of tactic, but the reality is he's absolutely correct, right? Yeah. Prices never go down. And I think people who are waiting for that just end up getting themselves, just unhappy, right?
But and as the consumer in that scenario with that contractor, he immediately lost my trust because and I don't know, maybe because we're in the industry, it was easier for me to pick up on, but I literally thought to myself, so I had an adverse reaction to the first number he gave me, and then the price immediately went down. How did that happen?
Was he just adjusting product in his head, thinking, okay, you don't want?
Was he just trying to take me to the cleaners and make more money off of me just to see if I had the money, right? Was my kitchen going to be 80 regardless of what I did in it because I didn't respond to that number? Or did my project truly cost 50 and he's got some huge markup on it where he's lining his pockets, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because he put no thought into that number that he gave me. He literally did not put any thought into it. I mean, he barely took 2 measurements in my kitchen. And let me tell you, that is in no way, shape, or form enough work to tell someone what a kitchen's going to cost.
So what you're saying right now reminds me a lot of our clients, especially our initial clients and that initial meeting or our kind of new, prospective leads and those new, clients. When we go to their house, this is a kind of a similar reaction that we have, right? And it's usually, we're actually not typically providing, much pricing information, at least in that first meeting. We might be providing some general, very, basic ideas of what those rough cost ranges might be, but we're generally not providing that kind of cost information. But if we do, generally, this is the kind of thing or response that you elicit from a client is like, oh, it's going to cost that much. And so usually what I want to do is I want to really kind of understand what the client is, what they want, what the buying kind of motive is, right? I generally want to understand what the client's, kind of buying motive is. Is it just about price? Because if it is just truly about cost, we'll probably never be the right, client or the right contractor and designer for somebody because again, if somebody who's just out looking for the bottom dollar, that's not exactly what we do. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to be the highest price, but what we're trying to do is bring the highest value, and we're trying to make sure that we can provide a price up front to a client and stick to that number, right? And we know how to do that.
Right.
And it's always scary for new clients to trust us to take them on that journey. But I do think that, we've developed a pretty good process. And this isn't something that, is 100% ours, right? We've taken a lot of these pieces from other really good contractors, people who understand the business side of this, how to pre-plan and really understand pre-construction at kind of the depths.
Yeah. I say this almost every time we meet a new client, but I have never met a client whose wish list wasn't bigger than their budget.
Yeah.
Ever. And even you and I as consumers, I mean, we talk about this all the time. Like, we do stuff at our own house and we're like, oh gosh, I didn't think it was going to be that much. I thought it was going to be a little closer to this, but you know what? It's worth it. I want to do it. Go for it. I mean, we just did this with the landscape lighting.
That's funny. I was just going to say, I know we're kind of getting off topic a little bit, but I do think it's worth highlighting that, we are consumers as well. We do the same thing. We have a lot of the same reactions that our clients have. And I think it's funny because in the moment when we're actually the ones on the other end of purchasing something,
like, gosh.
we go, gosh, we're literally having those same reactions that our clients have, right? And I think it's very funny to just put yourself in those shoes, right? And I think the most recent two things that we've done at our house would be the blinds, right? Mm-hmm. And then the landscape lighting in the backyard. Mm-hmm. And so, let's start with let's just go ahead and carry this for a little bit. So the landscape lighting, we did a little bit of homework, right? So we actually got online. So this is how I think our clients find us too, right? It's not more typically, it's not a Google search, just kind of random. Usually it comes from some type of a referral. Somebody wants to, they want to begin their journey with trust. And I think the way that they do that is by asking people that they trust, who they trusted maybe on a previous project, right? So you reached out, I believe, online to get some information on some landscape lighting companies. And how did that go?
Yeah. So I looked at a couple of companies that both had pretty decent reviews, Google reviews or whatnot. And then I, did the initial contact. I think I sent, through their contact us form through their website to both. And one of them reached out to me immediately with a really nice email, like, thanks for your inquiry. Can we set up a time for a quick chat?
Okay, so that's step number one, right? Step one, I just want to recap this as we kind of go through this. It's
relevant.
And it's communication, right? We talked about I talked about communication as being one of the bigger things, and I know you said that was at least in the top 3, and maybe it wasn't your top 2, but I do think that that's a big deal, right? As people frequently will call contractors or service providers, and they won't call them back.
Yeah. And that's what happened with the second one. It took several days, maybe. I don't even really remember, but I basically was ghosted, for a lack of better words. And then I'd already engaged with the other company. We were chatting, having productive conversation. And then kind of randomly, the other one reached out, sent me a text or an email. I'm not really sure which. And said oh, did you want to, chat? And I was like, oh, well, I'm already kind of far along in the process with this one. I'm good now.
Yeah.
And I think that happens with you and I. We talk about this also, from a sales perspective, people buy from people they like. Well, I engaged with someone else. She was giving me great information. She was explaining her process to me. She appeared to have a process, which was appealing to me because, how we love processes. And she kind of won me over with that. And in our first conversation, she kind of prepared me to be surprised at how expensive it was going to be, right? Which didn't scare me away because I was like, well, that's fine. Maybe I don't know what the cost of this is, right? And we didn't. And we always talk about this too. We talk about this with people have a number in their head. it doesn't come from anywhere other than like maybe a gut feeling. I don't know what it is. And it's usually probably derived around how much money they have to spend or how much money they're comfortable spending.
Right.
And then they expect to get their scope of work completed for that number of money.
Yeah.
Right. That amount of money. And we were no different in that scenario. Although it took us not long to get from like, oh, okay, that's the cost.
Right.
I was wrong. And we ended up spending the money anyway.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good, this is a good example, I think, because it is also kind of the journey that we take our clients
Right.
through. And like you said, most clients, including us, right, in this scenario with the landscape lighting, we were excited to do this project. We were willing to wait to get it done right. We found a company that we liked and trusted, and they earned our trust through their process. She was actually very good at explaining what it was that they did and how they got us there.
The different options.
The different options in terms of the equipment and the automations and I think when we started to get some of those first numbers, we were really like, whoa, this is really expensive. And being where we are in our business and understanding kind of how this works, I don't think our first inclination was to just run, right? It was, okay, this is probably more than we can spend or more than we want to spend and maybe even more than we can really afford at the moment. Again, everybody, has some sort of a budget or some sort of a maximum number they're willing to put into a project. And this was really no different. I mean, ultimately what happened is we got great equipment. We got a great base piece of equipment. We got really cool lighting, right? Mm-hmm. We're super happy with how it turned out. But we did sacrifice a handful of things. Yeah. We wanted to light another structure in the backyard. We were thinking about lighting the retaining wall, and we didn't do those things because we didn't have the money right at that moment, right? But I think, and this is very typical of our construction projects, is people have to kind of sacrifice, something, or maybe they have to phase the project, right? And that's nothing different than what happened here, right? We, she told us from the beginning, hey, if you start with this base unit, this is a kind of an expandable unit.
Yeah,
and
we
this
can build on it later. Mm-hmm.
And you can add to it, right? So if you can't afford to do all of this at one point in time, then I think that this at least base unit would be the nice unit because then you can add these two other structures or the retaining wall later. Yeah. So I think that was really cool, right? Because she gave us kind of that option up front so that we knew that once we got the price, there was still some option to change that price, where I think sometimes when you're dealing with contractors or service providers, again, they just give you a number and it's kind of like, this is it, just take it or leave it.
Yeah. I think another myth, maybe, if you will, that people tend to think about contractors is that they're just making up the prices as they go along, right? Or they're just, there's no structure behind their pricing. And sometimes I wish we could show our clients our estimating spreadsheet so that they could understand the methods and the process again behind that estimating, right? It's not that we just go, oh gosh, I just went to this house in Granite Bay. These people looks like they have a lot of money, so this project should be more expensive because they have more money. I think a lot of people think that. I mean, my uncle used to talk about that when they lived in Granite Bay, behind the gates. They had a nice house. He used to talk all the time about, contractors come behind the gates and the price just goes up. And I just want people to know that at least for us, the cost is the same. The pricing structure is the same whether we're working in, Rio Linda or Granite Bay.
Yeah.
Right? We have methods behind our estimating, and it's all derived from our expenses to operate our business legally and appropriately and to pay our employees fair wages, to offer them benefits, to pay our rent, to pay our insurance, to make sure our clients are protected
Right.
from liability. And there's a structure behind that. It's not just us guessing, what the cost is going to be. And so the project is the same no matter what neighborhood it's in.
Yeah. So in this kind of first segment here, we were talking about the traditional path. And again, the traditional path was kind of like free estimate. And another one we hear a lot is get 3 bids,
Right.
or get 4 bids, right? Get 4 estimates. And this is also, in my opinion, this traditional system or thought process is extremely broken. It actually doesn't work. And I think as we move through some of this, these other segments, we can talk about why that kind of myth is really kind of has been debunked. And going out and especially when things are a little bit premature and we don't have a lot of information, it's really kind of impossible to get 3 or 4 bids. And especially, we always hear the word apples to apples, right? And what are the apples, right? If we don't have a plan and we don't have any, materials specified, how is it that they're providing you a number, right? It's just like saying, for example, I want to buy a car. Well, what is the manufacturer of that car, right? And, I'm not trying to bag on anybody here, but obviously there are expenses associated with certain types of vehicles, right? Are we buying a Toyota or a Ford, or are we buying a Maserati or a Ferrari, right? You can't just say I'm buying a car and expect that has just some fixed number that's associated with it. So, for me to walk into your home and assume that the finish level that you want is going to be appropriate for you, I could be way off one way or the other, right? What you think is, a beautiful cabinet or, a beautiful countertop may be something that I'm underestimating in my free estimate, right? I may be, discounting the fact that you want something really nice. On the flip side, I could be doing the opposite, right? Like you just said in your example, I could walk into a home in the middle of Granite Bay and assume that they want the Taj Mahal, but maybe that's not what they want. Maybe they want something very practical and they just want something that's fitting for the value of their home.
Yeah. Yeah.
So moving into segment 2, this is actually why this traditional or more traditional method of getting 3 bids and free estimates, why it generally fails.
Yeah. Well, so to kind of put this in context for people who are listening, so what pre-construction is, so in the olden days of our business, we really used to call this design, right?
Yeah.
But it's evolved into so much more than design, because design is super critical to a project, which, when we talk about design, we're talking about the floor plan, the layout, right? Where the cabinets go, what the cabinets look like, how they're, all of the things, laying out a kitchen, making it functional, picking the countertops, picking the faucet, picking the hardware. There's so many details that go with design. But then beyond that, there are also building details that need to be thought about and worked through. And I think one of the best examples I can give is the project in Carmichael that we did, where we were doing the addition of the family room and the bathroom. And
I'm trying to recall the project still, actually.
Ramias.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where we had a structural wall, and we wanted to trench the sewer over to add it was a third toilet to the house, but we're adding a bathroom. And it was super critical where we could place that toilet. There were not, we can put it anywhere, right?
Right.
Everything is we can do whatever we want. But is it feasible? Is it cost effective? Is it the path of least resistance? And when, a designer or a typical designer is designing something, they may not be thinking about those construction challenges that like we do. So you and I sat down for, I don't know, probably a couple of hours on that project and tried to figure out like, okay, where can we put this toilet so that it doesn't drive the cost way up? We don't
Right.
have to get into all these structural modifications of this wall so that we can make this project affordable for these clients just because the toilet's in the right place, you know? And so it's all these other things besides just design that we're thinking of and working through all of the problems on paper before we're actually in the field building the project.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think actually you said something, you were kind of bulleting out those lists of things that you were, talking about with the client. I think it's also important to note, like, was that item, like, what was the importance level of that item, right? So, when we're talking about, all these different variables, like, is it is it affordable or feasible? I mean, that's a lot of that's driven still by the client,
Right.
right? Because what we may say is, hey, the path of least resistance, maybe they don't want the path of least
Right.
resistance. Maybe they're willing to
Right.
pay more to put the toilet on the other side of the house. Or,
Right.
and I think there have been a lot of those projects, but I think what's important to note is that, we are generally trying to be mindful of
Right.
budget, right? We're trying to be mindful of and trying to take generally the path of least resistance, or at least provide that as an option. Because I think that, I want people to understand that just because maybe the coolest place to put that toilet would have been somewhere else, a toilet can be very challenging to move, especially when you're talking about moving it in a slab. We were really trapped kind of by a foundation. We really had, some challenges to get the toilet there at all. Right. And then, were we getting the right, slope and flow and all that kind of stuff. So I think, it's worth noting that, like, in this particular project, the bathroom was the main kind of focus, right? I think there was an addition on the project, which was, I think, was the higher, the overarching part of the project, right? But the main focus was adding a bathroom that was accessible to the from the backyard,
Right.
that could be used as basically the pool bathroom.
Right.
And that bathroom was also going to double as kind of a guest bathroom. Yeah. So that, because right at that time there was only one bathroom downstairs and it just happened to be in the primary bathroom. So it was kind of awkward for people
they had
that
a
were
second
visiting.
door into their primary bathroom for guests.
Yeah. It was a very interesting layout. So, I mean, the bathroom was obviously very important in that, because they wanted to get their bathroom back.
Right.
And so they were, I think, willing to make the costs necessary to move that, or come up with pay the cost, right? That was necessary to get the toilet and the bathroom where they wanted it. But we also still, in that case, took the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think what's important to note there is through the pre-construction processes, we got to know our client pretty intimately before we made these decisions. We'd already had pretty serious conversations about budget and needs versus wants. And we were able to really educate them as to, hey, this is how we think we can lay it out for the toilet to go here. You still can kind of check all the boxes and give you what you want in the bathroom. If we go a different path, it's going to probably drive the cost up, and we may not be able to check some other boxes.
Right.
But we already knew what her needs were and what they were trying to accomplish. We really focus on getting to know our clients and wanting to be an advocate for you and trying to help you spend your money the most effective way and to check the most amount of boxes.
Right.
Like I said, remember, everyone's wish list is always bigger than their budget. And whether people like to hear that or not, they're probably going to end up making some sacrifices in their project or removing some scope, or they're going to be, in some cases, finding a way to access more funds. And maybe that makes sense some of the time, but not all of the time. And we want to get to know what our clients' needs are, and we ask a lot of questions. We spend a lot of time talking. And so that really helps us gain trust with our clients and then help them maximize their investment and get them, as most bang for their buck is kind of the term we like to use. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had said something there too that I was trying to recall, or I had a thought and I lost it, but I'm sure we can come back to it. I think I mean the topic was kind of also like why that typical kind of process does fail. Um, Maybe you can touch on that a little bit. Like what are some of the things that you see, go wrong in that more traditional path? Because I know I've got probably a few that I can add to.
I think the biggest thing is not being intentional about what we're building. So how many, I mean, and we've done this as consumers too, right? Our landscaping project long ago, right? We didn't have a design or a good plan.
It was all just kind of verbal, right? Yeah.
And
not the contract itself, but just what was actually happening. Right.
Right. And the last thing I want one of my clients to do is walk in on the day of install and go, oh, that's not how I was thinking it was going to look. Or that's not, I don't really like the tile installed that way. Or, I don't want my clients to have regret when they see something in person. Now, some clients, you can't please everyone, right? But the idea behind that is that we've talked about these things so much that they know what we're building. And I've tried to illustrate on paper to them as much as possible what it's going to look like when it's finished using 3D renderings and diagrams and things like that. And then that's saving them also the potential costs of seeing something once it's installed and them going, gosh, I really don't like that. I want to change it.
Yeah.
Because, that's at your expense if that's what happens.
Well, yeah,
right?
It could be.
It could be.
It depends on the contract and how things are spelled out.
If we weren't clear, right, this is where things can get muddy. If we weren't clear in our documentation how the tile was to be installed, or what the tile was, what the grout color was, all of these things, if we didn't have that all written down and on paper and agreed upon ahead of time, and the client walks in and says, that's not what it's supposed to be. Rusty, you told me that was going to be a subway pattern and you installed a herringbone pattern on my tile. Now we're arguing over who pays for that change, right? And the client is just mad, grumpy, unhappy. The contractor is potentially losing money, resentful of their client. It just puts everyone in a bad mood. And when we have all of these conversations before we start construction and we're all clear about what we're building, it makes it a heck of a lot easier and much more enjoyable to work together. Yeah,
so I think two things that I think are at least two of the biggest things that I talk about, like when we go to clients' houses and we're obviously trying to explain this process to them because our process of pre-construction is not super typical, right? Like especially in this industry, I think it's becoming more typical. But contractors actually have a very difficult time kind of selling this, pre-construction process to a client and selling either the concept and or the time that it takes to do that. And so, one of the things that we see break down or fail in kind of the more traditional path is that contractors are really quick to try to get you into contract, right? So they're contractors, right? They contract. It's in the name, right? So they're really quick to try to get you into contract, and I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble, right? And so going back even to the beginning of this conversation, where we started talking about the guy who came to our house and just walked in the door in 5 minutes, he threw out an $80,000 budget, with no detail, no nothing. Had that been a number, maybe you had, let's just say, for example, you had 3 other people come out before that, and they were all giving you numbers of $200,000. Mm-hmm. That 80,000 number might have sounded really good, right? And sometimes that's just the case. It's just kind of the natural progression of how these things work out, right? And you get to a point where you're hearing what you don't want to hear, and then all of a sudden you hear something that you do want to hear, and you're like, oh wow, this guy's only going to charge me $80,000. We still have no plans, but let's sign the contract quick. Let's get him locked in.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I want
Yeah.
my kitchen redone.
Right.
And he can start next week.
Yeah.
Another red flag.
Yes, all red flags, which I think we can go into,
That's a whole different podcast.
Gosh, there are so many, right? I mean, obviously this is just number one, and I think we're rambling a little bit to an extent, but I do think, we're kind of getting just the basic ideas now of what this is and what it does, but this pre-construction, right? So I think where we see that, this breakdown is they'll sign the contract or get you to sign the contract. And effectively, from that point forward, you're doing what I like to refer to as, you're solving problems, right? You're immediately in problem-solving mode. So what problems are there to solve?
Yeah.
There are what you just talked about. There are the materials. We still need to select the materials. What is the cabinet? What's the countertop? What's the flooring? Again, I mean, you made a really good point about tile. I think that could be its own probably podcast by itself.
Right.
Because tile, I think, is one of the few things on a job that tends to be messed up. And because it is very difficult, it's tedious to draw in detail, right? But I think that, immediately what you're doing in, again, the more traditional method is you're solving problems. And those problems are choosing materials and basically figuring out what the existing systems are. Two of the points that I make, again, when we're talking to clients are, and kind of how this process can help them. And these are just examples, kind of theoretical examples, but I've seen these exact examples in real life. But one of the big ones is, let's just say they get you into contract and maybe they were even just somewhere remotely close, right, with numbers. Their proposal will be filled with allowances and budgets.
Yeah.
And so those allowances and budgets, I think this is the number one thing that people don't understand, right? They really can't wrap their brain around it. And it's probably the number one thing that gets both contractors and homeowners in trouble.
Yeah.
And it's because how can you as a consumer quantify, not doing this every day, how can you quantify that the numbers that are there, outlined in front of you on a proposal
are going to afford you what you want?
Yeah, that are going to get you what you want, right? And so I think we see this all the time. And, a proposal looks good, the number looks good, the budgets look good.
Well, it's a really easy way for a contractor to adjust his bottom line to make the number look a little better.
Sure.
By just trimming some numbers off of your budget, right? Oh, well, they could go buy a prefabricated slab from China for their countertops, and
Sure.
then that makes my countertop, number look so much lower. And then it's on them. Oh, you want marble? That's going to cost you more. You're
Right.
driving up the budget, not me, you.
Well, I think that's an important point, and let's just touch on that a little bit while we're here, because I think what people don't, and this is why I say it's not always the contractor's problem, right? I don't think that the contractor did a good job of leading the client in the right spot, but again, it's about understanding how the typical process works and why it's not a great way to move forward, right? And I think what you just said is, okay, cool. What was the specific example you just used? Countertops. Okay, so let's just say, actually, let's use cabinets. I think that's a good one, because in a kitchen project, that's going to be one of the big drivers of cost, right? It's going to be a heavy hitter. It's expensive. Cabinets, it should be. You're going to spend, I think on average, upwards of 25, 30%. It could absolutely be way more than that.
Right.
I've seen it be closer to 50%, right?
People get funny about their cabinets.
They really do. And I think that, especially again in a kitchen project, that is one of the kind of the main highlights, right, of that project. It's going to be probably...
This is one where the men like to get involved.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we see a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
Like
I need plywood.
Yeah, I need wood.
real wood.
Yeah. That is a big one, I think. But, I think this is one that we talk about all the time too, though, is that cabinetry is you can build a box 1,000 different ways, right? And you can build it with 1/2-inch plywood, you can build it with 3/4 plywood, you can build it with particle board, you can build it with MDF. There's a million products out there and a lot of different constructions too. And again, not going into the weeds of maybe necessarily why a cabinet might cost you more, one way versus another. Construction is a big one, but materials are also
Well, yeah, I was going to
big.
say you haven't even gotten into the door style, which is what we look at.
Right, exactly, right. And so that's the pretty face, right? And so sometimes I think like, people will say, "Hey, $50,000 on my, is my budget for my cabinetry." That's got to be plenty,
Right.
right? And
Oh,
then
do you
all of a
want
sudden,
walnut?
yeah, you want walnut or you want rift white oak, and people don't necessarily realize that, again, what did that $50,000 number come from? And again, this is hypothetical in this situation, but it's also not very uncommon for people to spend $50,000 on cabinets in
Right.
a kitchen, right?
Right.
And again, we've had people spend a lot more than that in, just on cabinetry and just in a kitchen. So, and we've had people on the flip side, we've had
Spend
people
less.
spend a lot less, right? So I don't want to give people, an idea that, that's where cabinets are. But I mean, we've seen literally cabinet packages go all the way from $5,000 to $7,000, $8,000, all the way up to $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, right? And I wouldn't necessarily say that those projects were the same or similar, but I would also say that they probably weren't like crazy far off, right? And I think a lot of that just has to do with, again, the construction. Where did the products come from? Are they custom? Are they kind of a modular or what we call like a semi-custom type line? There's a lot of different ways to get, different products and get them at different price points. But I think it's important to understand that, where this fails, again, to try to make full circle, is you got a $50,000 budget. You go out and you pick your cabinets, and what you want costs you $80,000, right? We're already $30,000 over budget. Let's just say this was a $200,000 kitchen or a $250,000 kitchen. $30,000 is a big percentage of that, right? And so this is, I think, where we see a lot of consumers start to kind of blame the contractor, right? And again, I agree that the contractor should have led them to a better place. That being said, I've seen a lot of consumers just jump to that early number and just jump to it, and then it jump to signing the contract, not doing the homework and doing their research to find the right contractor. And because of that, that contractor potentially led them in a bad direction, right?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're starting off their project over budget, right? Another one that I use frequently as kind of a hypothetical example is the electrician, right? We talk about, a project that now, let's just say, gets to, mostly completion. You've got a set of plans. That set of plans might just be a simple black and white kind of a floor plan. Maybe it's got some parts and pieces on there. You've got your can lights and your outlets and switches drawn on there. And now that set of plans that's been developed with the contractor and the homeowner, once that's been kind of fleshed out, now that goes out. The contractor sends it out to all their subcontractors. Now the subcontractors will provide an estimate or a bid on that piece of paper, right? But usually those plans are lacking a lot of detail, and on top of that,
and context.
And context, and here's always my thing, though, is that generally these subcontractors didn't get access or didn't ask for access to the existing property to assess what the existing systems were. So in this, hypothetical situation I'm talking about, which I have actually seen fail in multiple, other real life experiences, the electrician shows up on day one. We're just doing a kitchen project, for example.
Poor Sparky, picking on the Sparky.
I know. I hate to pick on him, but he shows up, right, and he's given a bid of, let's say his part is $20,000.
Yeah.
And he shows up on day one and he goes, whoa, he opens the panel. He goes, I had no idea that, we were only working with a 100-amp panel.
Yeah, there's no more room.
Or, we don't have enough room. You've got solar and I don't have anywhere that I can tap into. We're either going to have to update your panel or we're going to have to put in a sub panel, and that's a $5,000 change order.
Yep.
Right? It's probably more than that. But okay, so now just in those two things, just in those two examples, which again I think are very, very real examples. We see this time and time and time again, or something very similar in terms of these examples. In this just those two, they're $35,000 over budget on a $200,000 or $250,000 project. This is where pre-construction really helps people dial in numbers and not have these sorts of nightmare horror stories happen to them.
You're going to use my catchphrase here. Do you want to know what your project is going to cost before we start or when we're finished?
I think that's a really good point. And I think we obviously know that there's only really one way to do that, right? But I think people out there listening to this, they don't know that. The answer, if I ask them that question, do you want to know what your project is going to cost you before we start or somewhere in the middle or even at the end, everyone is going to have the same answer.
Right.
The answer is going to be, well, of course I want to know what it is before we start. I don't want surprises. Nobody likes surprises, right? Some surprises are good, but there's not a lot of good surprises left in life after you've had maybe 18 or 21st birthday, right? These surprises, especially in construction, they're almost always financial. They will cause you a lot of headache, both parties, right? Both the contractor and the client. But again, these are what I want to challenge people to listen to what I'm saying in terms of these more typical type of experiences and understand that there is a better way to do this.
Yeah.
And the better way to do this is to engage in some sort of a pre-construction process because it will help you stay truly on time and on budget.
Well, and let me put another spin or another example that maybe people listening can relate to. So before we did pre-construction, there were times where we would sign a construction contract and we'd even include design hours in our contract with me, right? Yeah. We'd put, 10 hours of design time in the contract. We'd have a general scope. Let's just call it a kitchen remodel. We'd probably even have some allowances for material. We always tried to make sure they were pretty realistic. And then we'd sign the construction contract, and then it was on me to corral the client to get them to make their choices for everything. We're rushing to draw cabinets, cabinet plans, pick out finishes, all of these things. And then what would happen would be we'd pick out, let's pick on countertops again. We'd pick on a countertop and we'd go, oh gosh, that's back ordered, or we can't get that in time, or, so sorry, you need to reselect or pick something different. And then maybe what you pick that's different isn't enough money in the allowance. And maybe it's even as simple as, gosh, we're traveling, we're out of town. I can't come meet with Brenna to make these selections in time to get the product in time for, the field to install it.
Yeah, and so now we're in construction and again, we're solving problems.
Right. And we're stressed and that puts actual stress on me trying to force a client to make decisions, which, maybe they need more time to think about something, maybe they need more details, or nothing becomes intentional at that point. Everything is reactive instead of proactive.
That's a good point.
And then that is where I think people end up with choices that they may regret later on, right? How many times have you done something or purchased something and then later on thought, gosh, I really wish I would have done this instead?
The old buyer's remorse.
Right. Yeah. But now it's here and I just live with it, right? And so I want to eliminate that for my clients because we've talked through pros, cons, the good, bad, and the ugly with everything that we're doing.
Right.
And just I think the key word is like being very intentional about what we're doing, what we're building, what we're picking. Not everything's going to be perfect, right? And there's always potential for products or things where we go, gosh, that faucet wasn't as awesome as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's something more minor like that than like, oh, these cabinets really suck. So
I think it's worth kind of, let's just summarize really quickly kind of what what pre-construction is kind of in a nutshell, and at least our process and how we do it. And I think it follows similar suit to other people who do pre-construction, but let's just talk about it in a really rudimentary how does this work, right? And I think again, let's just real quick recap. The traditional way of doing things is you call the contractor comes out to your house, he throws you a number, you like it or you don't like it, and you sign a contract and you start going.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you solve problems through construction. The other way, right? The way that we are, trying to get people to understand, which is our process of pre-construction, is now working with the client. In our case, it's actually two separate or independent contracts, right? So we have a contract that is prior to the construction contract, right? It's completely independent of the construction contract, and we call that a PSA, which stands for Pre-Construction Services Agreement. This, again, like you alluded to earlier in the show, is that some people oversimplify this by saying design, right?
So much more.
We don't like to call it design because design is actually a small element in our opinion of this pre-construction process. And, again, pre-construction has a lot of different pieces. We're just kind of talking about the overarching benefits of this. But effectively what it is planning, right? So we are getting all of the details. We are getting all of the cabinet details, the make, the model, the manufacturer, if it's a custom product, the samples with colors, and you know what I'm saying? All of those details, right? And we're putting those together in the way that we do it. We put it together in a binder, right? We create effectively a pre-construction binder for each of our clients through this process. And that binder ends up being about sometimes 50 plus pages. Yeah. So, and effectively this becomes our proposal, right? So if you're looking at, how this works again, is we're signing a pre-construction services agreement, which is a very low risk, right, investment in your project before you've ever committed to actually using us for construction. And I think this is important for people to note, is that we do this for two primary reasons, right? Number one is I want to start working with the client. I want to help them, get the things that they want, but we also want to do that while being mindful of their budget, right? So we want to start talking budgets really early. We want to make sure that we kind of joke that we're living on the same planet first, right? Because if we're not, we don't want to drag people down this process of spending, thousands of dollars in pre-construction to eventually just get them to a point where they say, like, I can't even afford that, right?
Find out they have $50,000 to remodel their kitchen.
Right. And so, and I think there's a lot of different examples there, right? But again, we want to start talking some very rough numbers really before we sign that PSA, right? We want to start talking about, like, what do you think, what kind of budget ranges are you comfortable with? And this is always the hard part, right? Is figuring that part out. But outside of that, we want to sign this agreement, and that agreement really allows us to work with that client on a professional level. They're getting to work with us. They're giving us some input, and we're producing some output, right? And effectively, at the end of that process, I'm going to reel back or rewind just a little bit. At the very beginning, we're talking budget ranges, and I'm talking about within the first couple of weeks of engaging in this PSA, right? We're going to get to, let's just say modestly within the first month, depending on the size and the complexity of the project, we're going to provide a range of costs, right? So we just did this with a couple of different clients. And so the range of costs for this one project, for example, they came to us. I'm not going to say names or the project, because I don't want to disclose budgets for people. But this particular project, the addition that we're working on right now, or the connection of the two, the house and the garage. So this project came to us and from actually an architect. And so we've built this team, right? We built this team, an architect, a designer, and a builder. And they said, this is kind of the intent of what we want to do. This is kind of, the idea, right? They wanted to connect basically the house and the garage. They wanted to add on, not just there, but they wanted to add on to the back of this area too, because they wanted to provide a place for a new primary bathroom and bedroom. So they said, hey, here's our budget. I think their budget to begin was around $400,000. And at the very beginning, we said, okay, well, I think that the budget's going to be pretty tight to just do what we're talking about even right now. But let's start to work on what the shape looks like, what the amenities are in these rooms, what the size of these rooms, and then let's start to shape this out and see if we think we can get you into that budget range. And I think we got them really close, right? But at the same time, we checked all the boxes. But when they saw that initial design, they said, well, we'd really like to do maybe the kitchen too, because it just seems like in the main portion of the house, because it seems like we're going to be doing all this work and it's really close to the kitchen. Can we start to look at the cost of the kitchen? And we said, hey, I think you're going to want to probably look to extend that budget potentially by a couple $100,000 before we can start looking at this. So now we're talking about a rough budget of around $6, right? So we now have mapped out all of those details, but we're going back and forth with the client, right? We've added things, and which has made the cost, those ranges go up. And I mean they, right? The clients have asked us for some additional things, and we've told them while they're doing this, hey, this is potentially going to add some cost. These are the costs that I think they're going to add. And inevitably what we did was we landed on a layout, right? And this is with a lot of back and forth over about the first month of pre-construction. And this was a big project, right? Big dollar amounts too, right? We talked about ranges all the way from 500 to 800,000, which again, for some people, this is not going to be a realistic budget range for what they're wanting to do. But for this particular project, it was somewhere in the range of about 5 to 800,000. So then they started really kind of digging into the nitty gritty of this, their finances and what really made the most sense to them to spend the money on. And now they've dialed it back and they've landed somewhere in the middle, right? But the point is that we didn't give them a number and have them sign a contract just to later tell them that they were going to have to get rid of the kitchen or the deck,
right,
or change the size of their bathroom because their budget wasn't going to afford to get them there. So the idea is that when we provide these services, these pre-construction services, and we provide a binder at the beginning that has all the information in it, right? And we're handing that to them, and that is our proposal. That proposal is based on real stuff, right? It's not, there are no budgets. There are no allowances. It's all real materials. And I think that's very important for people to understand as if you want to know what the project is going to cost you before we start, the only way for me to do that is to get you real tangible products, right? So I think that differs very much from the more typical, contractor proposal, which is probably a couple of pages.
Yeah.
And
sent an email.
Maybe, again, just a laundry list of budgets and allowances. And it's their guess, again, of what they think that you want. Yeah. And when you don't pick something that fits inside of that budget, then it's on you to pay the difference, right? You're contractually obligated to do that. So, that's really how that works, right? So again, I know that was a long way around saying that. And again, it's really hard to kind of summarize. We always say it's hard to summarize 19 or 20 years worth of business, right?
I've got it here in 8 steps.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's perfect, right? So we do have what is that, kind of a diagram of, kind of simplifying the process or helping people understand kind of the main points in 8 steps you said? Mm-hmm. And so, but the idea here is that we sign a pre-construction contract or agreement. We work through that pre-construction, and the idea here is that you aren't locked to using us for construction, right? Now, I have no intent of getting involved with you in, this pre-construction agreement if ultimately I'm not trying to get you to construction. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what we're trying to do, right? But it is important for people to understand that, especially in these projects that we're spending a lot of money, right? And a lot of money is very subjective, right? $50,000 could be a lot of money to somebody, and $800,000 could be, a lot of money to somebody else, right? It doesn't really matter. In any scenario where, a client is spending to them what they feel is a lot of money, we really want to make sure that we get this right.
Kind of taking it like super bird's eye view, top down, quick and dirty.
Mm-hmm.
What are the steps of pre-construction? So the initial consultation, let's meet.
Yep.
Let's interview each other. And I do say interview each other because we are looking for clients that we enjoy working with as well. Life is way too short to work with grumpy clients. So be fun, have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Let's get to know each other. Let's, how many clients do we have that we would call friends?
Yeah.
Now, right?
A lot.
Right. And, okay, so initial consult, client onboarding. So we come, we measure, we start getting details, talking intake here. Then we go into concept design and budget guidance. So we're talking rough drafts and budget ranges at this point. Then we dive into the design details. So let's fine tune that design, that floor plan, the materials.
So that's a good point. Why is it important to kind of go through those design details, not until that point?
Well, for one, because we want to kind of nail down the budget.
Yeah.
What do we want to spend, right? We want to lay down or plan out the layout. Usually at those first initial stages, we have so many ideas, right? So if you picture it like a funnel,
Yeah.
we're intaking all the clients' ideas and their Pinterest board and, the dreams, and we're trying to funnel it into reality, what works in their space particularly, and, what's reasonable, feasible, going to meet the needs, that sort of a thing. And then once we have a good layout, I would say, then we can start placing, the accessories and the jewelry into the plan.
Yeah.
And really picking those materials and talking through that stuff. Then we go into construction documents and building plans. So now we're getting into the technical aspects of the build. That's where you start to come in and, feasibility and looking at specs and doing a site visit with the subs and all of that sort of stuff. And start building our plan pages that, we need for building permits and whatnot.
Right.
Then from there, we go into proposal, right? We start estimating real, true projects with structural engineering and materials that are picked out and subs that have visited the site to check out the electrical panel. Poor Sparky again. He gets a bad rap. But your proposal numbers become so real at that point. And there's a lot of time that's spent in that proposal phase. And it sounds we just simplify it so much by just saying proposal. But really what that entails is a 20-page written scope of work, a construction schedule that tells you how long your project's going to take to build and when we're going to finish. And yes, we are going to finish when we say we're going to finish. And just so many details at that point. And we know each other so well and so intimately by that point that everyone's excited to get going.
Right.
And you're, going to sign the construction contract. We don't have hardly any clients that get that far in the process that walk, right?
Right. And that's something that I touch on with a lot of clients too, right? As I say, we have an extremely high, and again, I always say feel like we're tooting our own horn here, but we have an extremely high conversion rate of getting people to the end of building that binder and actually having them use us for construction.
Yeah.
And I would say that modestly, that conversion is around 95%.
Oh, yeah, especially
modestly.
if we get to that point.
Right. And I think in my opinion, this is the number one reason. Well, maybe two primary reasons. One is I think by that point, we've proven to the client that we are going to be the best contractor for their project and designer, right? We're the best team for their project. There is nobody else that could take this and pick up exactly, understand all of the things that we've talked about for the past, 3 months, 4 months, whatever that, process is, and be a better contractor for that. So I feel like that's kind of number one. The number two reason that I think we are a really high conversion rate at that point is because, again, going back to like weeks 2, 3, et cetera, early on in this PSA process, we've given you budget ranges. Right. And we've continued to tighten those and talk about those through this entire process. So when we get to the end, if I provide you with a number that was inside of that budget range that I gave you originally, you're probably going to be okay with it, right?
Yeah.
You're probably going to move forward. Where people, I think, tend to run is when there isn't a lot of budget, talk or budgetary guidance, if you will, kind of through this process. And then they get to the end and they get sticker shock, right? You haven't been the contractor or the designer hasn't been very forthright in what they feel like these costs might be, and maybe they started somewhere in a good place, but maybe even the client, ran wild and decided to do all kinds of other crazy stuff, and maybe in that process the contractor didn't keep them apprised of what they might be adding to the project. And I think that's important to note too, right? Is that the client is effectively almost always the driver of the cost. Like I think there's a common misconception that I'm the one that's making these costs, and you're the one telling me what you want.
Again,
right?
This is where I want to show them your spreadsheet. With all your formulas and
I know, but on the flip side, like I also don't want to educate. Because I don't want to. I mean, we used to do that, right? Like we used to show more on the proposal, and it's not that I don't, that I have intentions of not being transparent, because we want all of the major items to be transparent. But the cost of a sheet of drywall is the cost of a sheet of drywall. And the cost of a drywall nail is the cost of a drywall nail.
Well, I make this comparison all the time. I mean, it's really oversimplifying it, but do I go into Nordstrom and look at this handbag that I'm really eyeing and go up to the, cashier and say, how much did the leather cost to put this handbag together? And what was the zipper? And how, we kind of get stuck in this place where people feel like it's their right to maybe know how we put our costs together.
Yeah.
And that can be frustrating.
That's interesting too, because that's another one where we say like there's no other industry where people have that, feel like they have that right? I think you used the analogy of a purse, for example. And my analogy that I usually use is of a car, right? I use car in a lot of these scenarios because it's like, where can you walk into any dealership and say, you might get the basics, right? You get effectively what we are providing, right?
A line item.
Right. You're going to get a list of the things, the components and features that were put into that vehicle. You've got seat heaters and air conditioning and all this stuff, but there's no breakout of those individual costs. There may be a package or something like that, right? But for the most part, there is no, line item. We hear that a lot. Do you provide a line item detail? No, we don't. We do provide breakouts of each section, effectively what are the totals of kind of each trade section. And we want to, again, be transparent in terms of where those costs are going. But on the flip side, the costs are what they are. And the formula is the same, like you said, whether we're working in Rio Linda or we're working in Granite Bay or, some place that, is generally, more expensive to live, right? And so, but I don't want people to think that, those numbers change in any way. Every contractor is effectively going to structure their business to probably net themselves somewhere in a 10% profit range. Maybe it's 8 to 10% profit range, right? That's just how most businesses operate. Some may be a little bit higher, some may be a little bit lower. But the reality is that every business is kind of structured that way. So just because your project, you may think that it costs a lot of money, that doesn't mean that we're putting any more money in our pockets. It's all a factor of the project itself, the scope, and usually which is ultimately becomes a factor of time, right? And it doesn't change. It doesn't matter to me. The profitability is the same on a $50,000 job as it is on a $500,000 job or a $5 million job. It's probably still just a factor of time, right? And to be honest, actually, as the job costing goes up, it actually the profitability may come down just a little bit, right? That's actually not super uncommon. These smaller projects usually have to afford slightly larger margins in order for us. We talk about mobilization, right? It's just like,
Yeah.
the cost to get these guys out of bed in the morning, right? And I know that's maybe a blunt way to say it, but the reality is that everybody needs to earn some basic fair wage, in order to want to do that work, right? And so we pay those people accordingly for that work.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, for the consumer, it comes down to fear, right? Fear of being taken advantage of by a
Right.
contractor, fear of overpaying for something, right? Because we have a huge stigma that we're fighting, right? And so I think that's just really where all of this behavior comes from consumers. And I think that my biggest advice to people is instead of the 3 bid rule, maybe this is, coming full circle, but instead of 3 bids, think of it as 3 interviews or 4 interviews, 5 interviews, however many interviews you need to do. Sit down and really talk with these clients, call their references. Our favorite one that we like to throw out there is like, let us connect you with a client that's under construction right now. What better person for you to talk to than someone that's in the thick of it right now? Are they pissed off? Are they happy? I'm sure there's something that's, gone wrong or something,
Right.
some adversity that we've had to deal with during a project. But interview, get to know people, check their references, pick someone that you feel like you can trust.
Yeah.
And know that if you're looking for that experience, that you're probably not going to find that with your low bid number.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. That's a really important concept, I think, is competitive interview
Right.
versus competitive bid.
Right.
It's a different mindset as a consumer. If you can go into your project with the concept of competitive interview versus competitive bid, you're probably going to end up in a lot better place.
Yeah.
For one, you're right. It does start with trust, right? And you've got to have some basic layer of trust in your initial interview with people. But I implore people to do this process, competitively interview, whether it's me or somebody else, because again, this process works everywhere. This isn't like specific to our
Right.
geographical region, right? So there may be people listening that aren't in like the greater Sacramento area, in California, and this process works everywhere, right? We know people, across the nation. We talk to contractors weekly,
Right.
about
country.
about this process, and this process works everywhere. It's not exclusive to any geographical region. So I think that's important. And I want to go back and say I implore people to take this approach, but also don't concern yourself early on with trying to figure out what the price is. And that's hard for people,
Oh,
right?
it's so hard.
Because people go, well,
What is it going to cost?
yeah, well, how would I know if I want to pick this guy?
Yeah.
But here's what I'm saying is if you get into pre-construction with somebody, maybe this is, again, a very low level. If you've got a good process and you can start talking about general price ranges very early on, then you should be good. But first and foremost, find somebody that you think that you can trust and that you think has a good process and you think that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. It's very interesting. You touched on the client references, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which we have a client references list, right?
Right.
That client references list I think is very important. I want people to use it. I want people to call our references. I think that's very important. That being said, it's very easy for a contractor to create a list of their best clients, right? From the past, especially when you've been in business for 20
Right.
years, you probably had quite a few, good clients, happy clients, right? That you can put on your reference list. So I think it's important to not just take the reference list at face value, right? Because again, if you have bad clients or clients that had a bad experience, you're likely not to put them on that
And
client
let's be real,
references.
we've had those clients.
Sure, absolutely. We have absolutely had clients that, for whatever reason, you can't please them. You can't make them happy. It's very rare, but it does happen, right?
And I think that you and I, though, have always tried to be self-reflective in those situations, though, and take those bad experiences and really think about, okay, what did we mess up in that?
Right.
What did we do wrong? Where did we maybe lead them in the wrong path? Sometimes it is just the client.
Right. Or where did we miss a red flag, right?
Right.
Like, I think we know probably
We know.
the one that happened most recently, which was still a few years ago, they were just a difficult client even through this pre-construction process, right? And I think that was where we kind of missed the mark is, like you said, life's too short to take, bad clients. Yeah. And I think
some
clients
people are just mean.
That's true. I mean, but clients should feel the same way, right? Is that you should not get involved with somebody who is potentially not somebody that you feel like you can communicate well with, because I think that's very important. Is if you feel like you can't communicate well, or maybe all the conversations are kind of combative, or they're just not really, they're not productive, then do you really want to spend, months on a project with that guy?
Well, and I think one of the hardest things, and maybe this is getting a little personal, but the hardest things are for me feeling, I want to feel respected for my experience and my knowledge. And I'm sure you feel the same way, right?
Of course, yeah.
And I think that sometimes when clients are really difficult, or for lack of better words, not respectful of that, then I just don't know that they're the right fit for us, right? And just, we've worked really hard to build this business that we have, and we're constantly changing and trying to improve what we're doing. And our whole goal is for our clients to have a good experience through this, and for them to be happy with us, and for us to make this a better thing than, what everybody hears about contractors, because everyone's got a bad contractor story, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are contractors out there, and not just us, that do this well and do this right, but they are not going to be your low bid that you get if you're going out and,
well, to be honest, numbers. I think they're hard to find, right? I think, we pretty much know who kind of our local, contractors are that have this, similar process. And none of us feel competitive with each other, right?
Like, we actually enjoy talking to each other.
Yeah, it's really funny, because I think when we were newer in business, we felt like, everybody was competition, right? Like, and I feel like that was such an interesting way to think, because now I don't think like that at all. I actually feel like there's very little true competition out there, right? It's just, to me, it's like we are either a good fit for, and you can understand the value that we bring with this process, or you just don't, and we're not a good fit, and that's okay. It really is genuinely okay. Like, we don't do any sort of high pressure sales or tactics to get people to sign with us, because the bottom line is that we only want to work with people who feel like they can see the value in what we bring to them, and understand that we are genuinely trying to help them. You touched on something. You said that it's about client experience for us. I think you listen to most contractors, and they will almost undoubtedly say something about quality and why, how they are the best at what they do because of quality, right? And I think that's fair. I think that, hopefully you are getting quality, right?
Quality should be the bare minimum.
Well, I totally agree, and I think that's where I was going to go with this, is that, that should be the foundation, right? And I think there are a lot of people who actually do phenomenal work, but again, they aren't very good at organizing these things. So sometimes people get a little bit clouded, right? Because they actually had a really crappy experience with the contractor.
But in the end of the day, the project turned
out really well, right? And it's because they do know how to build these things, and they do know how to provide ultimately a very quality product. But where we feel like, I think, our business differs from a lot of these other, people is that we're not hyper focused on or trying to establish the fact that we're the best quality, because again, like you said, quality should be the foundation. It should just be the baseline, right? What we're really trying to help people understand is that our whole mantra is about client experience, right? We know how to get you from this point to the end in the most efficient, least stressful way possible, right? But you have to see and find and understand that value before I can show you.
Yep.
And it's always hard to do. Like sometimes I have maybe an hour to talk to somebody on the phone. And maybe if we get past that kind of basic pre-qualification call, maybe we have a trip on site to show them the physical documents that, what we build for them through the pre-construction process. And again, so that may be 2 hours total. So we've got 2 hours to basically summarize, 20 years of a process that we've developed, right? And again, I'm not suggesting that this is our proprietary thing, right? We're not the only people doing this. We're just one of few, right? And I think that I think it's going to become more normal over time as we kind of retrain the consumer to this process. But it's going to be a long time, I think. But again, you mentioned in that process, that 8-step process, you mentioned, once you got kind of towards the end, we talked about structural engineering.
Yeah.
I think that was just something that was interesting because I like that we're talking about doing structural engineering at the end, right? And I think that we've seen so many times where people have brought us plans, right? And they're, midway through the process and they've left their contractor or they've left their designer or their architect or whoever they started with, and they've created these documents, and now they're because they're doing the forbid, the typical thing, right? They're walking them around to different contractors saying, what's it going to, what do you think this project might cost? And a lot of times in that scenario, we've actually seen where the structural engineering is actually done. And we're like, wait a second, you're still and just now getting pricing, but you've already completed a set of plans with structural engineering. So you've paid that structural engineer to do all of this. Like, once again, these are costs that are associated with developing or designing construction documents. But it's not always the right order, right? Yeah. What if we get to a point where we say, here's the basic floor plan, here's the amenities that we think you want in there, here's the range, and then somebody says, oh, that's probably a little higher than I want to spend.
I need to go pay the engineer to revise my plans.
Totally. So why not let's figure all those things out first and then get the engineer on board, right? These are super small pieces of a much bigger puzzle, but I think it's important to point out.
I think what's important to point out, though, maybe to differentiate us from some other people that do this process, though, I know, because I know you, but I know that you have a very deep understanding of structural things, right? And you usually are thinking of those structure type things early on in the process and how things might need to be built in order to accomplish some of those structural details. And so I feel like that might be a little more proprietary to us in that that's your knowledge that you bring to the table for our clients, is that you have a pretty good understanding or can provide even some value engineering for structural stuff early on in those stages. So we don't necessarily need an engineer. I mean, on a bigger project, absolutely. Sure. But when we have, maybe an addition or taking out a load-bearing wall, things like that, you have a very deep understanding of what needs to be accomplished structurally to make those things happen. And so we're not usually surprised when we get engineering back later on in the process of what they're expecting.
It's usually pretty close to what we were, at least what our thoughts were.
Right. Yeah. And so I feel like that's something I'd like to compliment you on, is just that, I know that you have those ideas in your head and you're thinking of that early on. And that's not something that typically, you're going to take back to a client if we get the engineering later on in the process and be like, oh gosh, I didn't think about that. Like,
Yeah.
sorry, the engineering's going to, cost us 20 grand more.
Well, we still see that a lot, though.
We do, but we usually know our limits there,
Sure.
right? Like if you don't know or you're not sure, then you're
that
going
can be a significant cost add later in the project,
or you're going to
add
say
to the
like,
budget.
you know what, let's get the engineer at least to walk the site
Sure.
ahead of time to make sure I'm thinking of this correctly. But I think that that's something that maybe is a little bit different about us that other contractors may not have such a deep understanding of, or maybe they're a newer contractor or they haven't been through, what we've been through or the projects that we've been through. I mean, having a structural steel background probably helps you a little bit in that. So anyway, just a compliment for you.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Now I've got to find a compliment for you. We gotta when we talk about design.
There's so many.
I know.
How are you going to choose?
You're right. It actually makes my brain explode thinking of all the things. There are so many. It's interesting though. We were talking about the structural engineer and having some basic understanding of maybe what the structure is like. I think that's also something that's just a little bit important. Again, when you're selecting a contractor, right? Ultimately, you want to make sure that they have some background and expertise in what they are actually doing. So now this gets into maybe the experience level of a contractor. So maybe somebody who is a little bit maybe younger or newer in business, like I don't want to suggest that they're not going to give you a good product, or maybe they have a process and it's still going to be similar to ours. I don't want to suggest that person's not going to be able to deliver the same or similar product that we could deliver, right? Because that's just unfair.
You used to be the young guy.
I was the young guy, right? And to be brutally honest, like I didn't have a lot of that knowledge that I have now, right? 20 years later, opening a lot of walls, working in a lot of different areas, especially in, again, the greater Sacramento area.
Age of home.
You start to really understand like
building systems.
Absolutely, right? Having lived in multiple areas, having worked in multiple areas, it's actually kind of funny because people now, like I know you know this, but like people will call me. They'll give me a basic idea of maybe where they live. Sometimes they'll give me a street name, and I can literally like build the house in my brain because I
That's what you
know
do at
the
night
area
instead of sleeping.
This is true. It's a sad tale of my brain, but it is important though. At the end of the day, it's important that whoever you choose just has the experience for what it is that they're doing, right? And so I would say that maybe somebody who is either maybe younger and or newer in business might be a better fit for something that isn't so involved in maybe structure modification. Maybe that's the background they came from before they started the business. I don't know. Or maybe they've worked in a family business that's what they did. But at the very least, I don't want to say that you can't know these things, right, as somebody who is younger or newer in business. But I do think it's important to understand that the longer that somebody has been in business, the more crap they've probably seen, right? The more things that they probably encountered when they open walls, right? Do you know what age a house is when it's likely to have lath and plaster, right? And do you know what age that house, might need to be in order to have some other system, right?
Tube.
Yeah, or what do you see when you walk into a house that maybe tips you off? When I see a ceiling that's 101 inches, people think that that's probably a crazy number, but that's a legitimate number, right? You go into Midtown and some older parts of Sacramento, and you're going to see a ceiling that is somewhere in that vicinity, maybe 100 to 105. And it's because, back in the day, we didn't have 4-foot sheets of drywall, right? Or 4x8, right? So you go 4 foot and then another 4 foot. Now you got to be at 8 feet. So, these systems all developed over time and changed our construction methods. But again, it's easy for me to walk into that house and say, this isn't drywall. Or it might be, well, yeah, that's my measuring stick. So that's fingers up, that's 8 feet. So if it's over that, it's definitely a little bit taller. But I do think experience is important, right? But I also think that it's experience as it relates to the scope of your project, right? If you have a big project that has a lot of structural components and maybe there's an addition where you're tearing off and working into multiple systems, it is important that that person has done that type of work before, right? And this is like always make the analogy of like trying to get credit when you're a kid, trying to get credit before
Yeah.
you get credit, right? You're like, well, how do I get credit
I need
if you
credit
won't
to
give me
get credit.
And so, they're just like, well, go get credit from somebody else, right? It's kind of the same thing with a contractor. Like, at what point does, somebody say, cool, I want an addition on my house? Like, sometimes these guys just have to wing it, right?
Yeah.
And say like, well, I've never done an addition, but I got to start somewhere, right? Maybe it's a small addition, or maybe it's not a small addition,
Yeah.
and they just kind of get through it. But you do build that, experience as you move through that. But again, after opening, hundreds, if not even thousands of walls, and, understanding kind of what's in them, how they're constructed, the different eras of build, and what that construction looked like can be critical, right, in understanding how you're going to need to take something apart and how you're going to need to put it back together. And it's also good for the client because they need to understand that you have a good understanding of
Right.
that before you start that project, because otherwise, again, we're solving problems in the
Right.
middle of construction, and then that usually means dollars out of pocket for
Right.
the client.
Well, and I think that's just a really good example of the value that you can bring to our clients.
Yeah.
Maybe we should touch a little bit on, similar topic here about the differences of us being design build versus some other firms that are maybe separate, designer, architect, and contractor.
Yeah.
Some of the benefits to the way that we do it versus the way that some others do it.
Sure. I think, well, first let's talk a little bit about design build, because I think that there's generally kind of a positive connotation that comes with hiring a design build firm, right? Like, I think there are certain people that say like, I just want a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's typically the person who feels like maybe they need to like manage, or some kind of, they need to, be the puppet master for that type of a project. They're just looking for a down and dirty contractor, right?
Yeah.
I just need somebody to do the work. I can pick all the stuff. I can make it all work. That's fine. Whatever.
Yeah.
If you want to do it that way, be my guest.
My wife knows what she wants.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think, again, that's not going to be the client that's a good fit for us, because I don't think that client would see value in our process, right? And but I do think that that's just kind of an important topic, is design build. So design build has kind of historically meant that and this is a fairly newer, like historically kind of a newer term, right? And so design build is kind of looked at as, or at least perceived as, to how I understand and what people describe to me, is that it's kind of a one-stop shop, right? You're going to probably a builder, and they're going to help you design this project. So I want to make sure people aren't confusing design build with pre-construction, because it's extremely rare that a design build company actually has a pre-construction process. And so I think this is worth touching on, is that what is the typical design build relationship look like, and why is that not pre-construction, or why is that different than pre-construction?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, designers in general, there are so many different types of designers who could have my same, accreditation and do a totally different job than what I do.
Yeah.
Designers can range from someone like me who focuses mostly on space planning and material selection, cabinet design, more of the building end of things. And then there are designers that do furniture and, more on the decorating end of things, if you will. There's some that do both. They do all of those things. And there are some that just literally help you pick out materials. And I don't know how they get paid for what I shouldn't say that. They are providing a service.
Sure, it's just a different service.
Service. And it still, in my opinion, doesn't get you to the finish line of what the contractor needs to provide you a true proposal.
Sure.
They may not provide drawings or schematics or elevations, things like that. And I don't know where those come from if they don't provide that, right? Because the contractor certainly isn't doing it. There's maybe not an architect, or even if there is an architect on board, a lot of architects aren't doing those level of detailed drawings.
Right.
And so there's just so many different renditions of people that do really what both of us do, but a lot of what designers do. So it's very interesting. And
Well, I think it's tough for. I'm sorry to interrupt. I
No,
was just going
that's
to say,
okay.
I think it's tough for people who are just starting like their construction journey. They're just starting to think about, who and how they're going to do this, right? We hear this a lot. Like, I don't know if I need what I need, or they call us and they say, I need a design build firm, still not knowing
What they need.
what they need or what it is that we do, right? So we still have to kind of educate them on through that process. But I think to help people kind of understand what I think is the more traditional design and build setup is probably one of a few things, but I think the more typical is that it's actually just a contractor. And that contractor has a relationship with a designer or maybe a group of designers. And when you call them, they will kind of employ or help that person work with you. And I think typically what we see is actually the client will, or the contractor will get them still into some construction contract, which blows my mind how people, sign these agreements so early on. But it's the way that the contractor makes sure that he keeps the work, right? He wants to hold on to the work.
And if he's not charging for pre-construction services, then he's doing that so that he's compensated for that work.
And I think that part makes sense, right? Yeah,
rightfully
totally.
so. But that's why we do it the way that we do it, because we're providing a service. We want to be compensated for our time and our knowledge and our experience that we're providing for your project. And we're going to kind of roll the dice, if you will, in saying, we're going to get you to trust us. Like, you don't need to commit to us for us to be able to prove to you that we're the right one for your project. Because we know that if you buy into this process and you believe in what we're doing and you let us lead you through this, that we're going to end up with your construction contract. I don't need to trick you into signing that, early on in the game, because guess what? If we don't get there, you probably weren't the right client for us to begin with.
Yeah, I think where a lot of people end up, the road that they go down is like, they'll say, for example, they'll go into a design build relationship, thinking that they're, what it is that they're getting, and maybe they're kind of early on plugged in with the designer, again, in this hypothetical situation, which again is very real. It's very normal. They'll the contractor will put you in touch with their designer, right? Again, just a relationship. There's no problem with this, but just again, it's not always well put together. But then what will happen is they'll go to the designer, and that designer, or maybe they just start with the designer, right? Again, this is not necessarily maybe the traditional design build. You could just start with design. But in either of those scenarios, what I see happen more often than not is that the designer is listening, right? They're listening and they're taking in all these dreams and ideas. And I think that because the client generally thinks that the contractor is the one, again, with the magic calculator, that they rarely, if ever, talk to the designer about budget. Right. And so what happens, and sometimes the designers will not mislead, maybe that's not the right word, but they won't lead their clients to disclose that budget or give them some idea of what that budget is. So a lot of times, a designer may over-design something, right? I mean, I think you remember the one that we went to not too long ago where the client, we felt like they were pretty qualified, and we went to their house and they said, well, we have a set of plans. And we're like, oh, okay, well, let's check out the set of plans. And the plans said, it was literally moved the kitchen from one side of the house all the way to the other side of the house. And we said, well, is there a reason for doing this? And they did. They had some basic ideas, but this designer had already charged them, right? Charged them thousands of dollars. They have a basic floor plan. They don't have any material selections, nothing. All they have is a floor plan. They've probably paid we've seen $8,000 for a single sheet of paper, right? And they've listened to all the things that they want, but there was zero regard for the budget.
And do you remember what their budget was?
I don't.
It was $50,000.
Oh gosh. Okay, so we weren't living on the same planet, right? And this was a long time ago. And again, we've learned to kind of pick up on some of those things, ask more questions, right, and try to get some of this information. I think sometimes people are on the phone with me, for an hour and they're wanting to know why I'm asking these questions. This is why we're asking these
Right.
questions. I mean, we have to do some basic
If
qualification.
we went out and met with everyone who called us and dreamed with everyone that called us, we would never have time for our current clients.
Right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And I think, people sometimes wonder why, we get calls almost daily and people are like, I want an estimate.
Yeah, just come out and take
Can
a
you
look
come
at
out
it.
to my
Just
house
come
and
take a
give me an
look.
estimate? And I think, again, that's more of a traditional approach, right? Is can you come out and give me an estimate?
Yeah.
Well, I need to talk to you first, right? Like I can't just come to your house and like you suggested, kind of dream with you, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody who calls me and says I need an estimate is the wrong customer
Right.
because frequently they aren't, right?
Correct.
They may be a good fit for our process, but I still need to talk to them, right? I need to know what is, ideally we can get to some budget conversations in that first call,
Yeah.
right? Like, hey, I've got a kitchen project. This is what I'm thinking of doing. We think our intended budget is between $150,000 and $200,000. Okay, cool. I think that we're probably we're living on the same planet,
Yeah.
right? Like, I don't know, sight unseen, that project may be much less.
Yeah.
It may be much more,
Yeah.
right? We just went to one just recently. It was a kitchen project,
Yeah.
right? And I air quote kitchen because
It was a whole house remodel.
it was a whole house remodel. And not only that, but the kitchen was actually an addition, right?
Yeah.
Remember, it was like an expansion
Yeah.
of the back of the house. And it's like, well, that's a different project. Had they told me on the phone, it's a whole house remodel and an expansion of the back of the house, and they only had 200,000 as a max budget, I would have said, sorry, we're
Yeah.
probably not on the same planet
Right.
now, right? So again, I don't want to drive out there and spend hours with them going through things
Yeah.
or working for free, right?
Right.
To just give them that information that I could have already given them. Now, I'm not going to try to be the bearer of bad news every time on the phone too, but again, I want to be realistic. I want to set a very realistic expectation with our clients right out of the gate, right? If I know that your wish list is bigger than your budget, which you suggested that everyone who comes to us, which is true, I think to an extent, the wish list is always bigger than the initial budget. But are you willing to work with me and let me help you
Right.
tell you where your budget
We'll get
and
you.
your scope will align? I always talk about budget and scope like a scale, right? And I know this is always another metaphor that I use, but it's like this is the scale. You've got scope on one side and you've got budget on the other, right? And at some point, those two things have to kind of align. They have to balance out, right? The scope or the weight of the scope has to equal the weight of the dollars that we're putting into this, right? Like, and again, I don't make these things.
Right.
I just tell you where these two things align.
Well, and also really important to note here, like we touched on, our pricing structure and how things don't change based on your zip code or whatnot, but also that especially when we're dealing with additions and remodels, every single project is unique and there's different factors that affect the pricing in every one of those projects. It's not like I can go and say, oh, yep, you have a 200 square foot addition on your house. That's going to cost X. Or we get the question all the time, what's the cost per square foot to
Right.
do this? And it's not.
And what is it that we're building? Are we building a
Right.
box with air, right? Are we building a family room? Or are we building
Right.
a bathroom that's
Right.
got all of the systems in your
Right.
house?
It's just, every remodel or addition project is unique and has its own pricing, and it's not something that's really easy to just sort of rattle off. And when we do give those ranges, we're taking historical projects and our experience and looking at things. We'll take from a library of projects that we've done over the last several years and say, okay, this has this element, that element, and kind of merge those together to develop what we feel is a safe range that you
Right.
can, quote unquote, take to the bank to figure out your finances and how, what that looks like for you. But, it's every project is just
Sure.
different.
Well, and kind of finishing that thought about the scale, right? It's
Yeah.
like, it's our job to kind of help you balance or figure out where those two things align, right? And so just like a scale, there's two ways that this can go, right? if you add more scope, what happens? This scope starts to tip the scale. And what do you have to do?
You have to add more money.
You got to throw more money in there, right? And so a lot of people don't want to hear that, but a lot of times we get there, right, where we get the budget and the scope to basically align or generally align. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I want to add. Well, if you got to understand, if you add more scope, you need to add more to the other side of the scale too, right? So it's like, or, right, we can go the other direction. And I want people to understand that this is how we help through this process, is that in balancing this scale, there are two ways to do that. You can add scope and therefore add money. So you can balance the scale, or you can also remove scope and remove money.
Right.
And that's how we go backwards, right? So we're trying to help kind of reverse engineer your project, right? So there is a little bit of, and this is why this process isn't just so cut and dry.
Right.
It's not something that just happens overnight. And it's because generally it takes a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of back and forth in understanding what's truly important to the client. And, we may get, a client that we get this all the time where clients come to us and they have 1 million projects, right? They're all over the place. We're working with one right now. And great clients though, right? Like, they have the money to do these projects. They absolutely have the money, but they've got so much stuff that it gets very overwhelming to think like, well, what is it going to cost? I've got a bathroom over here, and I got this over here, and
Flooring
I got a gazebo, and a
baseboard,
and
paint.
they're like, what do you think that's going to cost? And I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Right. But that's not how easy it is when we're actually out in the field doing this, right? We may have to trench something. We may have foundations or some other obstacle that, makes that move very expensive. And there may be other ways to do that. You can bounce those ideas off of me. And this comes to your experience too, right? Is that you have the experience in having me come back to you and say, this doesn't work,
what are
right?
you thinking?
And I think that, every contractor, especially if there's contractors listening to this, they're laughing right now because they're just like, yeah, the designer did this and the designer did that. And we hear contractors complain for a nice word, right, about designers all the time, right? Because they did this or they did that, and it's like, and sometimes it's warranted, right? Sometimes it's the designer actually trying to get, the contractor to think outside the box and come up with something really cool, right? So you get some of these kind of back and forths because a lot of people don't realize that contractors and designers are arguing like constantly, right? And sometimes that's what you're paying for, is you're paying for them to kind of hammer this stuff out.
I prefer the word collaborating.
Yeah, they're collaborate. We collaborate sometimes too, very loudly. And so I think, but I think, like I said, it speaks to your experience in having not only the design, understanding, but also that construction understanding. And we have strengths, right? I don't do what you do, and you do the design stuff very well.
Yeah.
And I would say that I'm probably much stronger in the building department, but it's the building department?
Ooh.
In the department of
building.
Yeah, well, let's leave that alone. Another podcast for another time. But it's important to understand that you at least have the wherewithal, right, to say this may be something that could cost the client a lot more money. And maybe this is something that I need to walk, down the hall and get some more information about what this is going to cost, right? What impact this may have on the project. So you've got myself that's usually here in the office with you to bounce those ideas off of, and we can have those talks. Or you've got, Jordan here in the office, and you can bounce those ideas off of him. So there's a lot of resources here inside the office, and we don't have to make phone calls and wait for answers. And the professionals are all really here. And I'm not suggesting that we know everything and we can fix everything and talk about everything. We're not structural engineers, right? There's certain things that we're not licensed appropriately to do or to talk about, but we still have ideas about these things and a basic understanding of these, things so that it can help the client.
Yeah, I would say that kind of goes back to what I said earlier, is anything can be done, right?
Sure.
I can take a client's dreams and ideas and I've even said this before, like at home, gosh, I wish it was as easy as, my CAD program that I could just click the button and that'll be perfect and perfectly centered and, all of those things. But I actually have to be aware of that when I'm working in a plan in my CAD program, that like I can't just fix something minor like that, maybe without affecting something else,
Yeah.
right? I want to always center and align and, all of these things. And,
Right.
and that's not always feasible in real life, right? And so I have to think about that. And I usually have to make, as I'm making changes to a floor plan, I have to make kind of a running list for you guys of what I tweaked.
Right.
What did I change? What
Yeah.
did I move so that you guys can see if there are any, red flags or any of that in what I've changed. My other point here, though, is no matter what path you take as a consumer, if your designer does not ask you anything about your budget before she starts or he starts designing for you, that is not good.
Yeah. Should be a red flag.
It should be a red flag, because how do I know what I'm designing if I don't know how much money I have to work with, right?
Well, I think that's maybe, again, another topic for another time, but I think there are a lot of designers out there who have really good intentions
Of course.
of providing something for the client, but there are a lot of designers out there who don't necessarily have the client's best intentions in mind. It's really about them and kind of their ego and
Right.
or their portfolio, right? And
Right.
they're wanting to kind of push clients a little bit further, maybe out of their comfort zone, just to make sure that they can get good pictures of
Right.
something. Because again, for a lot of designers, their portfolio is everything to them, right?
Right.
And if they do something boring, they do a white shaker cabinet and a white countertop, and it just,
I already
and
have
again,
10 projects
I'm
where I
not
photographed that same look.
right. But here's the thing: is I think this is another thing that we talk to people about this when they come in and say, hey, if that's really what you want is a white countertop and white shaker cabinets, and you want the floor that everybody else has got, it doesn't matter to me, right? I don't actually care. And I think you don't necessarily either. Of course, we want we love clients that can kind of, think out of the box a little bit, be a little bit wild, add a little bit of color.
Shout
I
out to
think,
Candace.
I know. Yes. Yes, I know. We have some that are really wild and fun and enjoy these types of things. But I would say actually the majority of people
Want to play it safe.
generally want to play it pretty safe, right? And I think, it depends on the client. Some clients are really, some of them are wild because they live in maybe a really nice neighborhood and they want to show something off. We've had clients, though, that live in beautiful neighborhoods and do really plain things, right? Just kind of very neutral. And again, it's okay, because to us, at the end of the day, we want to give the client what they want. We want to make sure they feel comfortable about it. But also, that's why we don't have a million projects on our portfolio, right? Like, we still, gave that client a really good product. They're really happy with it, but maybe it's not something that is cool enough, right, or wild enough that we want to actually showcase that on the portfolio.
Right.
Doesn't mean that they didn't get, something really nice and they're really happy with it. But, I think most of our clients understand that, right?
Yeah.
When we don't go do, professional photography, of their specific project, usually there's a reason, and it's just because it is mostly pretty neutral. And again, most of the stuff that we take pictures of needs a little bit of visual excitement, right? Social media is like, you got a split
3
second,
seconds.
right, to get, your kind of your point across, and they're going to scroll right past kind of the boring stuff, right, or the more neutral stuff. So again, you just got to keep that in mind too when you see some of these other contractors and what they've done. Maybe that's not all they're doing, right? Maybe, they're not only doing these crazy high-end, super wild
Yeah.
projects.
They're
They're
probably
probably
doing a lot
doing other
more.
stuff,
Yeah.
right? I think most contractors, we talk about job mix, most contractors have a pretty decent job mix. They may be doing a custom home over here, and they may be doing 3 remodels over here. Maybe they're doing a kitchen over here. Some really heavily focus on certain things. There are some home builders, and that's all they do. They don't do remodels, right? We do both, right? We do a lot of remodels because we do a lot of really high-end, large projects that require a lot of thought. They're very complex. And so people tend to find us, right? Because that is something that I think that we kind of specialize in the remodeling aspect of our business, is that we do tend to do these kind of very complex projects. A lot of people are very scared of those types of projects, and maybe it's because they aren't experienced enough to
or
do
they
those.
think it's just really simple.
True,
Just
right?
bump that wall out.
Yeah. Well, we hear that a lot, right? Can we just, push this wall out? And it's like, well, I mean, we have one right now that we're looking at, right? And she's like, can you push these two back corners out of the house? And I'm like,
that is the entire structure of your home.
right. I'm
right
like,
there.
This is wild. Like, we're talking about effectively rebuilding the entire back half of the house. And again,
It's
it wasn't,
two-story.
it wasn't about necessarily about it not being able to be done. But at that point, she had already disclosed to us what the intended budget was, right? And
it
those
didn't
two
align.
things didn't align, right? We're back to the scale. So again, I think that's, I think that was a good kind of conversation topic. This was episode number 1, right? And I think we came in here with good intentions. We had a good structure in terms of pre-construction. So I do want to kind of just at least close this episode number 1 with some kind of key takeaways or some highlights of really why pre-construction is kind of the way to go, or the right way to go, why we believe that it is the only way to do a project. And it is the only way that we do projects. Like, we don't do this typically, the more traditional bid. So maybe you can touch a little bit on that.
Sure, easy. I think sometimes we both wrap this up, like when we're doing an initial consult with our clients and explaining this. Sometimes it is good to hear me describe it, and sometimes it's good to hear you describe it. People pick up different things, but in my opinion, pre-construction affords you a couple of things. It is a project that is completed on time and on budget, and its communication is flowing throughout from step 1 to the end.
Yeah.
And for us, the goal is, I think we said it before, client experience. We want you to enjoy this process. This is a really stressful thing. Most people don't even understand, especially if they've never been through an addition, a remodel, a custom home build. I mean, it is a stressful thing. It's expensive. There are a lot of decisions to be made.
Well, we didn't even get into like design fatigue, right?
Right.
So again,
decision fatigue.
Yeah.
Decision
sorry.
fatigue.
Yeah. Decision, yeah.
Yeah. And we can help, I think, is what I want people to take away from this, is that yes, you will invest a little bit of money in this process in the front end, but what that affords you is our undivided attention to your project, to your desires, wants, needs, well-being, all of those things, and for us to really be your leader in this process, and for you to maximize your funds. And then by doing that, you usually recoup that money and save that money in the means of change orders, time, stress, and not making mistakes or making decisions that you regret later.
Yeah. I think, to oversimplify, it's just like anything in life, right? Anything that you can provide some basic plan for, or some, get yourself prepared and have a good plan for, is likely going to turn out better, right? I mean, you effectively never see this in like a new build scenario, right? Where somebody decides they're going to build a house and they just go out to the lot and they just start pouring concrete. I mean, there's got to be a plan, right? And the plans are kind of what we're talking about here. The plans take a lot of shapes and, different, forms, right? But those plans, it's not just as simple as having a 2-dimensional floor plan.
Right.
That's really kind of what we're talking about here with pre-construction, is actually, if you just kind of close your eyes and you think about what people generally get on a set of blueprints, an old school kind of blueprints, right? You have a floor plan and you have some details, maybe some exterior elevations, but most of those are just really done in black and white, right? And your cabinetry is all just boxes on a plan. That's not enough information for me to give you a real number, right? So the idea here is that we're really digging into the nitty gritty. We're bringing this thing, and again, in my imagination, concept here is imagine this two-dimensional plan now coming out of that piece of paper. And we're actually doing that. We're actually building this. We're modeling this from the bottom up. And we are truly modeling the entire interior and exterior of the structure before we start, right? So that when we start construction, we're not trying to solve problems. We're not trying to choose materials. We're not wondering whose job it is to go pick up tile on the beginning of tile day, right? Like if you had a nickel for every time you heard that. It's really sad that, there is a fix, right, for this. There is a process that works to help people stay on budget, but they don't always use it. I think it's really important to emphasize the cost aspect of this. A lot of people, they hear our spiel, right? And we go through all of this and they say, okay, it's going to cost X amount, right? They maybe, let's just for theoretical purposes, let's just say they're going to spend $5,000 or $10,000 to go through this process. A lot of times the way that people visualize that, especially people that don't understand the process very well or don't see it, right? Like they don't see something tangible before they get started. They think that it's just them paying us to provide them a bid.
Right.
And that's not what it is at all. It's actually...
That's this much.
It is. It's such a small part. I would say it's probably pretty close to about 5 to 10% of that total process, right? And yes, we are getting paid for that. And the reality is that a real proposal for a very complex, I would say a kitchen project, I would say we put in potentially 40 plus hours just into the proposal phase, right? It could be more, it could be less, but I would say on average, we probably put in close to that amount, right? And that's kind of crazy when you start thinking about it. It's like if every contractor provided 40 to 80 hours worth of free work, at some point they're going to need to make that up somewhere, right? They're going to charge the next client a little bit more because they're like, dang, all I've been doing for the last, 3 weeks has just been doing proposal.
Change orders.
Yeah. And that's where this is going, right? Is that the whole idea here is to spend the money now to try to curb, either reduce or eliminate altogether change orders during the project. And changes are generally, if they're not client driven, so while you're there,
about scope creep.
No, that's different. So the client adding things, client, I cannot stop you from adding more scope.
And that doesn't count for change orders for us.
Yeah, that doesn't count. I can't stop that. If you want to spend more money, I'm perfectly happy with you to doing that, but I also can't control that. Where change orders, where we frequently see change orders, again, we've talked about these, so I won't go back into all the details, but where we generally see change orders almost always go back to the very beginning, and it's a result of poor planning, right? So if we can convince you that spending this money right now will help curb all those change orders, you quickly realize that this is an investment that's money saved, right?
Right.
Because I would say modestly, we probably help people save probably close to 5 to 10%, right? And what's funny is if you think about that number, I just thought about that, but now I'm thinking about this number. Most contractors actually put a contingency in their bid, right? Or they'll suggest a contingency and say, I really think, client, because we have this and we still are working out some problems, let's put in a 10%, allowance or a contingency so that and effectively, what is that? That's a planning fee.
CYA.
It is a CYA. It's what it is it's the contractor saying, if I misguessed on your cabinets, you should probably plan to pay a little bit more, right? Why do that though? This is like going back to when we were new in business, we didn't understand this concept either, right? This is learned over time in both having clients that are not maybe happy because we didn't lead them in the right direction and learning some of this from other contractors. But understand what you're getting, understand your project at a very, very deep level before you start, right? That's the way what you're going to get. And that's the way you know when that contractor hands you that proposal that it is real and they're going to stick to that. There is no way to stay on time or to stay on budget if you do not have a good plan. Yep. And pre-construction, in my opinion, is the only way to do it. Is the only way to do that. Yep. So anyway, I really hope that to anybody listening, thank you if you listened to this whole thing. My God, we've rambled for so long. It's our first attempt at being in this room, using this room. We've still got some art to hang and some other things. Yeah,
you guys can't see it, but we can see it.
So we've got a few, and we've probably got some bugs to work out too. So hopefully the audio turned out. We've got some pretty inexpensive cameras right now. So we're just trying to test this. We're kind of seeing, if it sticks. The whole concept behind this and the whole thought process behind these podcasts is to be informative and educational. It is not for us to try to sell necessarily our services. Of course, we'd love that. Like if you want to learn more about our process, please, feel free to give us a call and, or schedule an appointment for us to talk to you to find out if this would be a good process for you. It's worth noting too that, when people call, they can talk to either one of us, right? They can actually call. You can pick up the phone right now and you can dial in. And if I'm not busy, you can actually talk to me, right? And or you can get on our website and you can actually schedule they call it an initial consult, right, on the website. And that phone call will be scheduled with me or with you. Yeah. So, I want people to know that, this podcast or this series of podcasts that we are wanting to do is really about education and helping the client make good decisions, right?
Yeah. So if there's any topics that anyone wants to hear us talk about, I don't know who wants to hear us talk, but happy to do so. We're clearly very passionate about this. We've spent a lot of time building our business and coming up with this process, and we feel really good about it. But if there's any other topics that, anyone out there would like to hear about or have us go into depth about, we'd love to know that feedback.
Yeah.
And then on that note, do we have any teasers of some of our other ideas? Maybe a next episode, what we're going to do?
That's a really good question. So I've got a list of a few that I would like to touch on. But I think, getting through some of this pre-construction and maybe even, like I said, getting some feedback from this video. So like if this is posted on YouTube or any social media, or if these even just any clips, we would love to hear some things that maybe you've been through in a project or you're concerned about with a project, because I do really want to spend this time helping people get educated on how to appropriately hire the right team, right? Mm-hmm. The right contractor, right? Putting the Avengers together. I know you always say that. But, I want to help people really understand. I want to help change kind of people's, again, their general mentality of why that 3-bid rule is kind of broken. And really there are better ways to do that, right? So I think we'll definitely start there. And I think ultimately, we'd like to get into some of the more, construction-related things. We're likely to have or invite a lot of our maybe past clients on. I know some of the...
I'm anxious for that one.
I know. We've got one on the line right now too, so that would be cool. But I also think that, we plan to have maybe some of our subcontractors come in and talk about maybe some of the pitfalls that they've seen with either us or other contractors, and what they've done to kind of help those or, help assist in fixing those issues. But if there's anything that, our listeners would, be interested in here, that's probably our moms right now.
I don't even know if they're going to listen to this.
That's true. Actually, I don't know that they would even know how to get onto a podcast. But I think, the plan is to post this in a couple different places, kind of see what sticks. And yeah, if there are any, topics that, you would like us to talk about, we'd be happy to, entertain those as potential topics.
And we're going to do some fun stuff too. We're going to have our daughter and maybe one of her friends on here and quiz them on some construction topics and see what they know, see what the next generation knows.
Yeah, I think I know where that's headed, to be honest. But That could be pretty funny. But I do think, like I said, if you were listening and you did listen to the entire thing, I definitely appreciate it. We definitely appreciate it. We hope that you got something out of this. And again, hopefully we'll be able to bring you more content, as we kind of, work in this podcast room and try to figure out what's working and what's not. But again, I'm hoping that picture quality turned out okay. I'm hoping that the sound turned out okay. We spent a lot of money on these things, but at the same time, we're not podcast pros, right, by any means. So, or audio video pros. So there's probably a lot that we still need to bug through. So if you got through us this far, thank you so much. And hopefully we can, bring you some more of these videos and help you figure out how to hire the right people and assemble your team of Avengers.
There are good contractors out there that are going to do what they say they're going to do.
100%. There are absolutely quality, organized, trustworthy contractors.
And funny.
Some of them.
Entertaining.
That's
me.
that do what they say they're going to do. And I don't want people to think that they won't ever find these people.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's tough,
yep.
but we can actually help you find those people and what ask the right questions to make sure that they have a process that's going to help you with your project.
Yep. Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. Again, my name's Rusty. I'm with K-Squared Construction. We're out of Sacramento, California. Actually, more specifically, Granite Bay, which is just a suburb of the greater Sacramento area. I'm here with my wife, Brenna. She is a licensed and certified designer in the state of California. I'm a licensed builder. And so together we are K-Squared. We are just a small part of the entire team. We're very grateful to have the people that we have working with us, and they are very much, kind of the meat and potatoes of this business as well. We could absolutely not do this without our team. So thank you, Jen, Jordan, Derek, everybody who has helped us in the past and continues to help us, and our subcontractors as well. So we definitely want to make sure that we're thanking all of these people, and we'll continue to do that as we work through these series. But
you'll probably see their faces on here.
Yeah, we'll work through it. So anyway, thank you again. We really appreciate it. Episode number 1. Hopefully you got something out of it, and love you. Bye.